I had all these marketing people telling me, who's your target market? And you have to like skew towards 40 plus and blah, 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 blah. And I kept saying, I don't have a target market. What I wanted was to show women that you didn't have to be rich, you didn't have to be, classically beautiful, you didn't have to be young to enjoy fashion and to enjoy getting dressed.
I am extremely excited to welcome my incredible guest today, Lyn Slater. Welcome, Lyn.
Hello.
It's wonderful to have you on the show. So, Lyn, you are an academic, you're an author, you're a public speaker, you're a model, a stylist, um, you're an icon, no longer an accidental icon. You've been on numerous stages across the world, virtually and in person. You have been on numerous major covers of world renowned magazines across the world. And you have modeled for some of the biggest names in fashion and luxury, from Uniglo to Valentino to Dior. So, in some ways, Lyn, you are the ultimate second curver. You know, second curving is all about getting on to the next thing, giving it a go, reimagining, reinventing, often without necessarily having an end goal, which is something you've also talked about, but which can lead to extraordinary outcomes, which is definitely the case for you. You really have been on a very special and extraordinary journey. So if we go back a little bit, Lyn, you basically have been professor at Fordham University in the Graduate School of Social Work for many years, engaging on the major themes of our day and our times frequently with your students and beyond. But some years ago, I think it was around 2014, or maybe that's the official date, you were looking for a way, from everything I've read about you and heard from what you said, to express your views on a range of subjects that matter to you in a way that was perhaps less restrictive than in the academic forum, and a way to connect with women of all ages. And hence the blog emerged. So we're going to come back to that in detail. But what I'd like to do, because it's linked to that and where you went after, is really go back to your early life. How we live, even as a child, often informs how we're coded. Well, it does inform how we're coded, and our lens on life as we go through it, right? And you've talked about the fact that even when you were little, you understood something about clothes, that they could convey something about, who you are, or even whom you might become. Take me to your earliest influences. I know you've talked about your beloved mother, and you've talked about the nuns at school, and you and I've got many stories about nuns and their habits. But take me back to that time.
Well, I think I was always a very imaginative kid. And I guess I was also an avid reader. And so I would identify with some of the characters in the books, and I sort of wanted to become them. And the way that I did it when I was young was to figure out how I could make a costume or dress like them. And so for me, that's why I always say that really I've never been about fashion. It's really more about using clothing as, I think, an artistic tool to convey and to experiment and have fun with different selves that you are and that you could be.
Yeah, which is the world of hope, right? The world of possibility.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that really impacted me is I've always been surrounded by people younger than me because I am the oldest of six. I was the only girl for 13 years. I
Oh
had
my
four
gosh.
brothers, and then my sister finally was born. And so I was always around people younger than me from the time I was a small child. And then in my social work career, I worked with young people primarily and young mothers eventually. And then I became a professor. So I was working with young people. And I think that really inspired me as I was creating Accidental Icon. Is I have a great respect for young people.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. They're our greatest teachers, aren't they?
Yes. And I think that, normally when we talk about ageism, it's directed towards, we think it's about older people, but it's also directed towards younger people.
100%. And it's inverse ageism in some ways, but and that's something I'd really like to come on to a little bit later in our conversation. But then take me back. So you decide to go into academia. What took you into that world? And way before Icon was even a thought, um, what role did clothing play in your life?
Well, as I said, I think I always used it. Well, let me just give a little context is that while I had this social work life, these very responsible positions, when I was a professor, when I was getting my PhD, I always had this other interest in developing myself creatively. So while I was taking on studies for my profession, I was also taking classes. I'm a lifelong learner. I've taken continuing ed classes forever. I plan on
Brilliant.
more of them. But I would take them in photography, in creative writing, in improvisation, in theater, in documentary filmmaking. So I always had this other place in my life where I was allowed to express myself outside of the boxes, right? Even that religion and family and society and your work and your profession, tell you to be in. So I think in that sense, I've always been really rebellious.
And Lynn, can I ask you, when you did those classes, and I mean, I am 9,000% with you. I think life is for living and for learning. And every day we want to learn something, right? Every single day. But when you were navigating this architecture that you were inhabiting with the structures of academic life and life full stop, right? With all the archetypes we also adopt. And going and doing these classes, and probably sometimes you didn't feel you had that much time, but you did it anyway, right?
Mhm.
So it's the action, which is so fundamental. And I hope all our listeners zoom in on that. It's like actually acting on the whim or acting on the inclination, just doing something. But how did you feel? I mean, clearly feelings aren't a permanent state, but did you have some sort of feeling associated with being in that creative, rebellious other place?
Well, it actually gave me enormous amounts of energy. And I would often instigate it when I was feeling very burnt out in my regular work life. And the irony of it was that because a lot of the things that I was taking classes in was embodied, right? Like improv and things like that, my body took those things into my work.
In
So
what
I
way? In what way did that manifest itself?
perfect example is when you are getting your PhD, they do not teach you how to be a good teacher. They teach you your body of knowledge. And one of the things that I'm very proud about is that I was a really well respected and highly rated professor. And I firmly believe that that was my improv training, that I was able to be very natural and spontaneous in the classroom. I was able to think on my feet. I was able to respond to opportunities for learning that maybe wasn't in my lesson plan, but turned out to be the most incredible learning opportunities for me and the students. So that's just one example. I think the improv and theater was totally what Accidental Icon was, because I Accidental Icon is me, but not me.
Well, we're going to come on to that, but two things strike me in what you've said. One, it's about, sometimes we think if we're too busy, we can't do anything else. But actually, if you add something in that excites you, well, you can definitely find the time and it gives you more energy for every other aspect of your life, right?
That's
And
right.
secondly,
Bring it back with you.
100%. And secondly, and you probably don't necessarily see yourself like this, but of course I do, is it's very entrepreneurial to be opportunistic and to see opportunities that come at you like you did in the classroom and which you subsequently did, with the blog and so forth. And coming to the blog, I'm just going to read something that you wrote because I think it's really pertinent to this. And effectively, you said you started it because you were having trouble finding a fashion blog or a magazine that offered an urban, modern, intellectual aesthetic. I mean, so beautifully put. You are such a poetic writer, but spoke to women who live what you would call interesting but ordinary lives. And that was something that you went down a road to explore. And I guess that was, very approximately the genesis for the blog. What do you mean by ordinary lives?
Well, I think that if you look at fashion and you look at Instagram and you look at most of the women that are doing that, it seems like they're living very extraordinary, luxurious lives. And I think what I wanted was to show women that you didn't have to be rich, you didn't have to be, classically beautiful, you didn't have to be young, to enjoy fashion and to enjoy getting dressed. And I felt, and then I portrayed that, right, in my photos. Because I often tell the story. My partner, Calvin, is my photographer, and
Love that.
yeah, he was a film camera person. And the first digital camera he ever got was to support me in doing Accidental Icon. So he knows no Photoshop. And so if in my pictures, I'm often standing on a New York City street, just in, not in a luxurious place, sometimes in a very derelict place. And there might be garbage next to my beautiful Italian leather boot. So it was very real. And I think that is what made people attracted to it. I think they felt, if she could do it, well, certainly I could too.
I also think that you were, in some ways ahead of the zeitgeist at the time, because, you know, that wasn't always the way, was it? Even with fashion shoots, often highly stylized. You took things into the street, and I think that created a very, very clear voice in a way for you. It was something identifiable, even though you do things in different ways, in different places, in different contexts. It's not the same look every single time, but it's something that's sort of a signifier at some level for you. But I'd love to talk about how that all came together, because clearly, you had your academic life, you had life in general, going forward. You were doing all these courses, things that you were passionate about. You couldn't find what you wanted to read, right? That we just described. So, like all great entrepreneurs, you thought, well, I'll solve the problem. You probably didn't necessarily see it like that, but that's effectively what you were doing. Like, I'll do it myself, right? And you did your homework, and you've spoken about this. You learned about pattern cutting, learned about all these different things. You had your students helping you with IG and all the rest of it. Um, it started getting you into different types of conversation in a way, and taking fashion into a different dimension, a bit like visual storytelling. I always feel that you tell a story with your images. It's not just a beautiful image. There's a story of depth behind it. How did it all start coming together?
Well, again, for the first I would say 3 years. Everything I did was unintentional. I had no goals. My only goal was I just need a way to express myself creatively in a way that wasn't academia. And I kind of liked clothes. So I'm going to start with that. And how I came up with the idea was during the year that I was 59, I started taking continuing ed classes in the Fashion Institute of Technology. And they were very random, like jewelry fabrication and, you know, social media and just different random things. And when I turned 60, I was like, I really, really want to do something different. And I took a class that year called Starting Your Own Vintage Store. And
Love
again,
it.
these so random. I was exploring, and it was a fabulous teacher. And she was very much like into, this is a personality driven business. So who's your personality? I was wearing different things to fashion school. I was the oldest person in the room. And a lot of the students and the professors would say, "You have great style. You should start a fashion blog." And it was in that class that the professor and all the students really were like, "You need to do this. You really need to do this." So I made the decision when I was 60. But then it took me another year until I was 61 to put it all in place. So that was the year I did a lot of research. I looked at what existed for older women in the web at that time. And it was not anything that was exciting. In fact, it was very much like, here's what you wear to hide your saggy arms.
Yeah.
Here's what you don't
Dreadful, right?
wear.
I mean, so life draining.
Right. Do not wear red lipstick. It bleeds. It was a lot of how to avoid aging yourself, and none of them were celebrating being older. Now there was one or two where women were wearing whatever they wanted, but that was a little too over the top for me because I was still a professional woman. I'm still having to go to work every day, and so I needed to have a style that was right on the edge of being, pushing the boundary, but then nobody could say you look inappropriate. So I did a lot of research that year, as I said. I built my own website and designed it through Squarespace.
Oh my God,
Loved,
amazing.
loved my website. And there was a fashion blogger that I really loved at the time. Her name was Garance Dore. And it's interesting. We have a similar trajectory of what happened to us, but she was going to be in Montreal, and that was in August. And I said to Calvin, I've got to go see her. I just feel like it will be good karma. So we drove up. I met her. I told her I was starting a fashion blog and what was her advice. And she said, never give up who you are. Never lose your authenticity. That is your biggest commodity. And so she signed one of her illustrations, and I went home after that and wrote my first blog post and did it.
And you were off.
Yes.
How did that feel? Because sometimes it takes a while to give birth to something, right, or someone,
Yeah.
and there's so much that goes into, and in fact, is so much of what you've done, even prior to thinking about this, got you to this point.
Right.
How did it feel when you got going?
Well, again, I have to just say what happened to me. If anyone had told me when I was writing that first blog post that what would happen to me, would happen, I would have said, "You're just crazy."
But the thing is, I suspect that a lot of your life experiences and your life skills, also in the classroom, you probably brought to your approach, maybe the discipline of being organized and inclusive with a group of people of all different backgrounds and so forth. All these things that you intrinsically do when you're in a classroom, right? Tell me a little bit about what you think you brought from your academic life and teaching to Icon.
Oh, I think, well, first of all, I think from my career as being a social worker, one of the biggest skills you have to learn is how to engage people into making a change. And you have to engage not only people who want to make a change, but people who don't. And then that skill continues when you're a professor because you have to engage students in learning, some who want to and some who don't. And so my engagement skills were at a very high level. And again, I think the improv skills, I think I had some writing skills. Um, I knew how to do interviews because I'm primarily a qualitative researcher. So, interviewing people and getting them to talk about themselves and relay important information was a skill that I brought to that. And I feel very strongly that we have skills in our everyday life that we are not aware of, that are highly creative, and that we can do anything we want, and we can be an artist and be creative, even though we might not know how to paint or we might not know how to play music. That these skills of just, you know, improvising a recipe, taking a different route to work one day. These are all, I read about this term and I just love it. It's called everyday creativity. Because we always think of creativity as being the big things, like, oh, I have an MFA in creative writing. And I think now, especially, that if you want to take something on and learn about it, you do not have to go to school to do that. And I often advocate to people, what's your syllabus going to be? You can write your own syllabus.
I love that. That is
You
so
can,
good.
you can give yourself your own assignments. Now, I personally have always gone to school as a structure. And, I have really come to a crossroads with Accidental Icon. I'm kind of taking a very different path. And I have a book that I've written about the last decade of when I was Accidental Icon and sort of the whole trajectory of what happened to me going through the pandemic and landing where I am now. But I, you know, became very aware that the thing that I loved to do most was write. So my first thought was, oh, I've got to go to an MFA program. And I said, what are you talking about? You can make your own syllabus. So I sat down, I looked at what writing courses were available online, um, what should I be reading, what assignments could I give myself, and I developed this program for myself. And I wrote a book proposal and it got accepted and sold. And
Of course it did.
the book will be coming out in March.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. So are we allowed to know the title or not yet?
Yes, you are. It's called How to Be Old.
Oh my God. Well, listen, we are going to come on to that theme because it's such a fundamental theme. But there's one thing I'd like to revisit because it's sort of on the pathway to you where you are now as a writer. I mean, you've been a writer for forever, basically, right? But you put in motion steps to take that to a new level and dimension, which is so fascinating. And I think as well for everyone listening, Like, how do you get going? Like, what would you say to someone who says, "Oh, my passion's this," or "I'm in a dead end job, and I need a break, or I need a change, or I've always wanted to do X, but learn how to cook properly, but haven't gotten around, haven't got the time." What's the one piece of advice you would give to everyone on that subject?
Well, the piece of advice that was given to me, um, and you had asked about this earlier, like what got you to take that step. My partner was listening to me talk about this blog for an entire year. And one day he had really had it. And he's kind of like, blah, blah, blah. Just do it. And I think that is my first advice. You can start talking yourself out of it immediately. It's like take a notebook, sit down, write thoughts. That's all you have to do.
Okay, everybody, that's what you need to do tomorrow morning. It is that simple. It's like, and as a writer, soon to be, published author with your book, it's about getting it to the desk and just writing each day or whatever your format is. So that is the advice for everybody, which I hope they will heed because it's excellent advice. Then coming back to when things started to go big at Icon, I'm sure there were a number of junctures on the road, but there's one that you've talked about. You talked about it in your TED talk. You posted an image of you, like many of your images, sort of quietly dramatic, extremely poised, very regal, very real, walking up a staircase, and literally within a very simple backdrop but a beautiful, elegant staircase, within 24 hours, you had 100,000 followers or additional followers. You know, in some ways, that was a pivotal moment, right? Because you were turning on its head the way perhaps people think about participation in the fashion industry, right? Strikes me in some ways. You know, inadvertently, and perhaps also with determination, putting out a question, an unsaid but suggested question that, we can change how we view the industry, that women can also ask questions about how they're being represented in society. So, I mean, incredibly powerful from a multidimensional perspective. What happened after that? Because things shifted in some respects, didn't they?
Well, I think, and I write about this, is that was sort of the beginning while it sort of propelled me into the world, and I that really became internationally known after that. It started to take away some of the things I most loved about doing it.
Like what?
Well, for example, I really engage with my followers. And in the beginning, whenever I had a new follower, I would send them a rose emoji. And those followers are still following me 10 years later. What happens when you are in the popular media and you have that moment where you're the big thing and you get like 100,000 or 200,000 followers all at once, that you lose that intimacy with your followers. I could no longer send every new follower a rose emoji because, again, I'm teaching full time still. And I'm just doing it myself with my partner.
And when did you find time to do it? I mean, you're a rock star. Like that requires a level of organization and discipline, right?
Yes. Well, I had a good structure in the beginning, which is another thing I would suggest when you're starting out. Um, I had this idea that I would do my main blog post on Monday. On Wednesday, I would talk about the clothes that I was wearing. And my main blog post in the early years was really talking about fashion history and highlighting a particular designer or interviewing a designer, because my thing was this is for women who want to think about fashion and talk about it, not just, wear it. So I think what happened in the beginning is I did not follow anyone's advice because I had all these marketing people telling me, who's your target market? And you have to like skew towards 40 plus and blah, 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 blah. And I kept saying, I don't have a target market. And I think what made me successful as opposed to other older women who were doing what I was doing is that I had massive amounts of young followers.
And you've said, and the age range may have shifted, but one of the talks that you gave that I listened to, you said that you have followers from like 13 to 90 everywhere in the world, every type of background. And you know what? Can I just say, I absolutely love this because we are so obsessed in today's world about the target market, the customer segment, forgive the consultancy speak. And they of course are relevant considerations in many contexts, right? But you were just doing what you were doing and sharing with everyone, and that is the beauty of this too, right?
And to be honest, 100% honest, you asked me when I had time to do this, so and on Friday I did this thing, I called it Friday Fashion Bibliography. And I would put up interesting links to stories about fashion, but they were never in mainstream fashion magazines. They were in independent ones. So it was a different kind of writing, it was a different kind of look. And I did a lot of work with independent magazines for free, which got me to the point that you're talking about, where a modeling agency reached out to me.
And not
And
just any modeling agency, of course.
yeah, it was, but I think I had made choices up until then about what I wanted to do based on, is this fun? Am I going to learn something new? Am I going to meet new people? And is it going to move my creativity forward? And so during this time, I did a lot of things I wasn't paid for. I did a music video with Charlotte Gainsbourg. I played her older self.
Oh my God, I love that.
I was in a music video with ASAP Rocky.
Stop
And with,
it.
again, I in Sticky Magazine and Flaunt Magazine and all of these independent. And that brought me to the attention of young designers in fashion schools like Parsons and Central St. Martin's. And they wanted me to wear their clothes. And so I always looked very different than people who were doing retail, sort of the traditional kind of fashion influencers, they call us now. But so it really was, I was just following my instincts and having those parameters. And then when I got represented, um, you know, agents are wonderful because they can get you really amazing deals that you yourself probably couldn't. I certainly couldn't have gotten for myself. But you do end up losing, once you're at that level, a certain amount of control. And as time went on, and you begin to work with more established brands or more established companies, they're much more controlling of your content. And that is when I started to become disillusioned.
Right. How
So I
far?
think
How? Sorry, Lynn. I mean, approximately how long after doing the big shoots and the big names and all of that did this feeling start to permeate?
I would say I had 3 years where I was really running 160 miles an hour. And it was during that period when I also decided to retire from teaching full time, which I look back on now and I say, there was something about doing both that was grounding for me and kept me in the real world. And when I was doing Accidental Icon full time, is when I began to sort of lose my way a little bit. And so I think right before, I think the year, maybe 8 months before COVID hit, I was really starting to feel very burnt out and not creative. And I was doing a lot of sponsored posts on Instagram. That was mainly what I was doing. And um, I had sort of lost my purpose in that way. But I had two experiences right before COVID that brought me back to where I wanted to be. And one was I worked with a group of fashion students at Parsons whose assignment was to create a capsule collection for an older person. And at Parsons, they have this course where they put students in team and they have to design for a marginalized from fashion population. So another team had to work with people who had a disability. I was the resident old person, but it was the most incredible experience. We worked together for a few months. They learned about what being older was. I learned about how they wanted to see themselves as someone old. And the tutors were wonderful. And that reminded me of my early days when I was happiest, because I was in collaboration creating something new that was never seen before. After a while with sponsored Instagram posts, you can be creative. Like, I give myself credit. I did a couple, like, during COVID where I adorned myself in towels and said I was doing couture with it. But after a while, they all start looking the same. So,
And what was
and then
the other one? Yeah.
the other one that happened was I had been invited by Hermes to go to Paris for 5 days. And it was, with Hermes, basically there's no expectations for you. They're just having you come. They want to give you an experience. So I was on top of their old building in their beautiful gardens that they made during wartime. And every floor we saw how the craftspeople worked. I learned how to do the saddle stitch that they use. I saw inventories of beautiful silks that they made over the years. There was historical objects of the very first bag they ever made. And you could see how over time they were taking that core. And I want to make this analogy to what we were talking about, that you're always bringing the old into the new.
Absolutely.
And you're always bringing everything you have to what you want to do today. And so you could see how over time it was still the same classic objects, but they were becoming new as time went on. So I just became completely re inspired. I remembered why I wanted to do it in the beginning. And then COVID hit. And that offered me the opportunity to stop everything.
Right. And just recalibrate, I guess, right?
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think just continuing on from that, one of the things that you mentioned also with the Parsons Project is this sort of notion of aging. I mean, we're all getting older every day. Let's face it. This is a biological fact. But it strikes me in some ways you're a kind of champion, of aging powerfully. aging in strength, because it's, to your point earlier, you have always been with younger people. You've always enjoyed that energetic exchange. You've always had an open perspective on the world. You are curious and interested. But many people, let's face it, when they get a little bit older, whatever that number is for them, they kind of retire from life in some ways. I mean, I don't really believe in retiring. It's not a word I use, but and never will, I think, in relation to myself, and that's my own personal decision and worldview. But sometimes there are people who, and perhaps some women struggle with getting older because it's a point of change, it's a point of transition. If they have children, maybe the children have moved on. If they were working, maybe they're not working in the same environment. They don't want to wear the same things, but maybe they don't know how to put themselves together, right? I mean, do you think things are shifting in terms of people getting older, people having the same value in society, etc.? Of course they should and they must, but we're so ageist in a way, aren't we?
Oh, I think it's gotten worse. I think there was a moment when I first started. And again, I think I just want to make the point here that privilege, right, has so much to do with your experience as an older person and how you are able to age. And I think one of the things that happened to me this at the same time was that Joan Didion at 82 appeared in a Celine ad, and I appeared in a Valentino ad. And I think the takeaway at that moment in time, because some of the blogs for younger women like Man Repeller, they went crazy over this because basically, if you're a smart, unsmiling, uh, older woman, that you could be cool. So I think there was an opening. And like you said, I happened at the right cultural moment. And so I think for a couple of years, there was some real change. But I feel actually that we're back in a very, very ageist time with a lot of young people being very terrified of being old and doing all sorts of things to themselves in order to stave that off. Um, I feel like we have two stories about how to be old. One is that just forget about it. You're going to be a drain on society, the gray tsunami. You're going to take from all the future generations. You're going to be depressed. You're going to be demented. You're going to be ill. You're just going to have a terrible life when you get old. And then the other one is, well, if you do all these things, you can look perfect and you could look young for a longer amount of time and everything will be fabulous. And neither one is the story of what it means to be old. And I think um, there's a great analogy for, I think, what it means, and it's used in design thinking. It's called the rose, the thorn, and the bud. And so there are a lot of amazing things about aging. There, like you
Give
do
me your
not,
top three. Give me your top
oh,
three.
you don't care what other people think, not in a bad way, that you're not compassionate. But really, when it comes to living your own life, you are the one who decides what that is going to be. You become very, for me, I have become very much centered in the present moment and very much valuing every second of the day. I think, again, for some of us, not all of us, we're in a situation where, for the first time in our life, after sort of making a lot of compromises as we were working, parenting, making our way, that we can do whatever the hell
Yeah,
we want.
yeah, that's a big one.
That's an amazing gift. But there's realities of getting old, right? You start to, you might have ringing in your ears, or you might have dry mouth, or you start leaking, or whatever. Um, but there's so much possibility now with technology that can help us age in a dignified and active way. And one of the examples I use is I was approached by these two technology companies to work with them. And it was around technology related to falling. Because for older people, falling is a big risk and it can lead to a whole cascading bunch of problems. So, one of them was this device that was like a watch, and it measured you over all these variables, and then it would send a message to your daughter or your whoever else that you were in danger of falling. And I was like, why would I want my daughter to get a message at work that I was about to fall? This it it was not something that. The other one, it looks like a Spanx, but it has technology in it that if it senses there's some muscle weakness, it pulls you up.
God, that sounds good. I love the
Yeah.
fact that you're going into technology. You're a technologist now. You're a polymath, Lynn, and this is like another second curve. I love this.
Well, I think, the technology can go either way, right? It can all be around, this is how we're going to take care of your medical needs. And here's a robot to make you not feel lonely. And here's this and that. But then there can be what I call life giving technology, which is like the falling device that pulls you back up. So I could still put on a beautiful dress and go to a party and not worry, as many older people do, that I'm going to trip on a carpet or trip on a stair. Um, and it just, no one knows. It's not like a lot of devices for older people where it's so evident.
Yeah,
I
which is
mean, my
also
mother,
stigmatic as well, right?
right. My own mother, we wanted her to wear one of those little alarm things. And she just, every time we went to visit her, it was hanging on the bedpost.
Oh my God, my father was the same. It was so annoying. He would never wear it. He's like, it doesn't go with my suit or my jacket because he always wore a
That's,
jacket, you know?
and also, it's like, why do we want to announce, right, that we're not completely and totally independent? Because that's what your big worry is, right? So I think
Absolutely.
technology that supports independence for older people is where we should be investing.
Absolutely. And not I sometimes think that people at moments of change in life can feel that their circumstances, whatever they look like, are being reduced and that they themselves are shrinking, right? And I guess often as people get older, if they've got kids, the kids have gone off and hopefully still come back to see the parents. But, you maybe have fewer friends, fewer contacts, fewer interactions, right? And we are in this incredible world. We can be creative the whole way, to your point. And it's about those messages of hope. And also in the technological era that we're in, and I'm a massive technologist, loved love technology and back technology, but we humans aren't going to go anywhere anytime soon, right? And it's how do we keep supporting? But can I ask you, Lynn, in after all these years of icon and also your intrinsic love of clothes, I mean, I think for me, clothes are about power. They give you power to go and face your day. You and I know, as do I'm sure many people listening, that you wear something beautiful, and it doesn't have to be couture. It could be from Zara, but you hold yourself better. You feel ready for the day. You feel ready for the meeting. You feel ready for the challenge or whatever it is. What do clothes mean to you today? And what is your view your worldview on the industry with all the widely documented comments around sustainability and fashion being one of the major culprits and polluting our waterways and all the rest of it. So tell me about that.
Well, I think I always, for most of my personal accidental icon photos, many of my clothes were from consignment or vintage stores. So, excuse me, I totally agree with you. And there is science to back it up that what you wear actually impacts your cognition and your brain. So there's evidence about that. And so I think that sometimes clothing and fashion control us rather than us thinking about them. And same goes for social media as a tool for us to use, not for people to use sort of against us. And so I'm going to be honest, I find a lot of the fashion right now very boring. The main fashion shows I watch now are menswear. I think some of them are very exciting.
Much more innovative, no?
Yes. And I think too that it really depends on your lifestyle. Like, during at the end of COVID, I moved out of the city.
How
I'm
was
live
that? How was that move? Just by way of aside.
Well, again, you can trace it through what I wear, right? So I've been dressing much more comfortably. I have really recycled a lot of my old clothes, and you dress according to, I think, the roles that you're playing, or who you might want to be at the moment. I've been taking care of my grandson, and I do a lot of caregiving for my two grandchildren right now. So just like when I was a young mom, I want to wear something comfortable. Like, this is a linen shirt dress. I have the two of them today, later. And so it's comfortable, but it's still kind of cool.
Yeah, and super chic. You look fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I think where I'm living now definitely has an influence on what I wear.
Mhm. Are you wearing
Uh,
the sunglasses as much, by the way? From
I'm
another fellow sunglass wearer, I have to ask
that's
you
a,
that.
that's real. I made that observation recently because that was the only way I could do it, because I hated having my photo taken. And so that was how I did accidental icon, but wearing sunglasses.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
And I remember the first time I went to London to meet my new agent, she had set up a TV interview for me on BBC, and I was so nervous. And they wouldn't let me wear my sunglasses because of the glare. And finally, she said to them, she's got to wear those sunglasses. Just find a way to make it work. So recently, I've started to take some photos of myself. And I found myself putting on sunglasses, but then I'm looking at the photos and I like myself much better without them.
Oh my God, that is incredible because I know that they are one of your signifiers, aren't they?
Yes.
And
Yes.
as I say, as a fellow sunglass, I mean, sometimes my children think I practically sleep in my sunglasses because I sort of can't be without them. So, what shifted?
Well, I think the big shift I made during COVID was to go back to more of the way I was writing in my early blog posts. So I would have an outfit, and I'm doing this now on Instagram, or I would have a photo and then I write. I've been doing mini blogging on Instagram, before I just throw up some caption. So I think that I'm back to where I was, and I became much more vulnerable. I, people for a long time did not know much about me, and I was very careful about that. I never allowed anyone to come to my home, to do interviews in my home, to shoot, none of that. And they knew I had a partner who took my photographs. I was a professor at Fordham. I lived in New York City. I had a daughter and a granddaughter, but that was it. And so, because for me, I was performing somebody different than who, well, that's not true either. I mean, I was the same but different in my everyday life because I always dressed that way for class. My students loved it. Um,
I bet they did.
but I think during COVID, I became much more vulnerable. I started to write much more intimately. I shared more about how I was feeling, and I've continued to do that. So I think over time, I become a little bit more comfortable with being vulnerable and sort of expressing this part of me now that, didn't come out before because I was a big badass as accidental icon. That was my whole MO. And part of the problem became that I always had to be a badass, even when I didn't feel like being a badass. And so now I feel like, okay, there's days I'm a badass, but then there's days, I'm having a hard day. And I write about that.
How
And
does that feel? Does it give you a level of um, peace, or I don't know what other emotion you might attach to, but how does that make you feel now that you're revealing more of that part of you? It's just another
well,
part of you.
it's interesting. When I was doing the research for my book, one of the interesting things is that with a blog, you have a historical record. And then there's Instagram, which is a visual record. And what I saw was that on my blog, because there was a certain point in time, people were not really interested in the blog. It was all about the Instagram.
And the image, right? It was a visual
Yes,
image
that's
grabbing
right.
you in. Yeah.
But I was quite vulnerable in my blog. I wrote a lot about how I was feeling about the experience. Like, oh, I'm traveling so much. I missed my mother's 90th birthday party. Like, I actually had to laugh because it was like going back over like student process notes of their meetings with the client, and you could see all the stuff that they can't see at the time. And I was actually laughing because it was all there, over time, how it had changed and how sad I was feeling about that. And then on Instagram, you've got this woman all over the world and she's hanging off fire escapes and she's, doing this and that. And um, so it felt like these two parts of myself had come apart. And so to answer the question, I feel whole again.
I mean, how fabulous is that, right?
I feel so grateful and I feel, and now this summer I am have a lot the book is finished and my grandchildren will be I won't have as much responsibility and it's an open book.
Well, I
And
think you
so
and Calvin have to come to Europe. Come and visit us.
oh, I love Europe. I love England. I love Amsterdam. Love Paris. Yeah, I am definitely I can feel all the European in me.
Oh God, well listen, we are waiting for you, Lynn. So Lynn, I have to ask you this because it's people will want to know. You know, you love clothes, you love the power of clothes, the energy, the identity they can give you. Um, some people really struggle with clothing, and they struggle with what they wear at different junctures. It could be a teenager or a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old starting their first job. I mean, at all points on the walk of life, there are reasons to have, fashion dramas or fashion queries. Some of our listeners will be wanting to know from you, what do they do? Where do they start? They're not comfortable with how they dress. They don't know which direction to go in. They just want to be themselves. They want to look good. They don't feel great. Maybe they don't feel good in their skin. Just a couple of pointers on steps to make, given that we're being very action oriented today.
Yeah. Well, I call this styling from the inside out instead of outside in. And the other thing is Ray Kawakubo, who is the designer who does Comme des Garçons, who I adore.
Yeah, incredible.
Her first boutique had no mirrors because she wanted her clients to feel how the clothes felt on the body. So what I do, and it's really interesting because a lot of talk shows wanted me to come on and do makeovers and style other women. I cannot style other women. I can only style myself. So finally, the Today Show agreed to let me try my method. So what I basically do is I would say to your listeners, write down 3 traits or characteristics of yourself that you're happy with now or that you might aspire to. And amazingly, a lot of women have trouble with this. So I say, if you can't do it, ask, your best friend, partner, kids, whatever. And then you can go into your closet or you can go into a store. And if you see something, you pick it up and say, would that convey that about me? And if it does, then that's part of what you're going to keep. And if it doesn't, then you put it away. And in your own closet, because we're always changing, like I have clothes that I have kept that I will keep forever because they transcend time. And I love them. But there's also times that different clothes that I have a different meaning for me, but I may come back to them at some future point. But the main thing is that you then put the clothes on and you have to think of it as an experiment. So you have a pile of clothes that you've picked that are these characteristics that you've described. And then you just start trying them on and trying them on in different ways. Like I did not walk into my closet and say, oh, this is the outfit I'm going to wear. It would take me maybe an hour to figure it out because I would be trying this and that. And then let me try these earrings. It's experimentation. And that is the key to all of this, is that you cannot be afraid to experiment.
100%.
And also to pay attention, how do the clothes feel on my body when I'm wearing them? Because you can put on a Chanel suit and it's not going to look like someone else who puts on a Chanel suit if your body is not comfortable wearing it. And so you're not going to project what you want to project by putting on something that somebody else thinks you should wear.
Absolutely. And I love the whole notion of experimentation, right? And not taking it too seriously.
Exactly.
Clearly there's a seriousness about clothes. There is, meetings have been won and lost on what people are wearing. And we do, because so much of our perception of others is the unsaid, isn't it? It's the physicality. And that also means what you show up actually wearing on your body. But this notion of experimentation strikes me as a bit of a theme in your life. You have always talked about this passion project, which became Icon. You had no outcome in mind. And I guess in some magical way, if you'd had an outcome, I don't know, I want to model for Valentino or Dior.
It would happened.
It would never have happened. But equally, you know, you did put in the groundwork, you know? Like you weren't just going, oh, wouldn't that be lovely? You actually did something about the passion. You acted every single day or every other day whilst running your, you know, whilst having your career, you know, and all the different things that you said you did as collaborations for free, etc., etc. You know, tell me about the risks that you've taken on the journey. Like, what give me some idea about risk taking and all of this for you.
Well, doing it at all, right? I mean, that was a huge risk. And particularly in early days, I did not like having my picture taken. I was comfortable enough with my partner, but when I started to have to be photographed by other photographers, particularly the first couple of years, I was very stiff and very uncomfortable, and I really hated it. And but it was also, I guess that's what ambivalence is. You have two very strong conflicting desires, and you have to decide which one you're going to go with. And so I was like, well, the adventure is probably better than me not doing it at all. So I'll be uncomfortable for a while. And I talk about this in my book too. I made a lot of mistakes
Give
because
me a couple. Give me a couple of mistakes.
well, the first one was just I was not really into mainstream fashion. So I didn't know a lot of the players. So I was sitting front row in a fashion show during New York Fashion Week. I had been dressed by the designer, and this gentleman comes and sits next to me in the front row. He's got these shorts and a little suit on, and we start talking. And he said, well, who are you? How'd you get to be here? And I have said, well, I'm a professor, but something strange happened to me, and etc. Turns out a lot of his siblings went to Fordham, so we talked about that. And then I turned to him and I say, oh, are you in fashion? And he said, yes. I said, oh, what do you do? And he said, I'm a designer. And he said, I'm Tom Brown.
Okay. Of course, because he loves his shorts, doesn't he?
Exactly. And so I was, I had a multitude of embarrassing moments that way. But what ended up happening was a photographer took our photo before I knew he was Tom Brown. And we're just looking like we're two old friends, like so
How
fast,
beautiful is that, right?
right? And then if somebody had come after that moment, I would have looked like I was still a little horrified that I had made the error. And I, basically tried to clean it up and said, oh, well, I really love your clothes. But I recognize your clothes. And I ended up insulting him even more. But, um, you know, again, being comfortable with making mistakes is part of it. And some of them can turn out into amazing opportunities. Like I once thought that the creative director and co-founder of Refinery 29 was an intern.
Right. Lovely.
And once I found out who she was, I wrote a funny blog post about it. And I emailed a thank you to her and a link to the post. And she thought it was hysterical. And after that, I started to get all these jobs with Refinery 29.
Right. But here's the thing, and sadly we have to wrap slowly, but in all of this, it really seems that it's about being oneself. You have been yourself, right? And you know, all of this, even what you're doing now, having gone onto a new curve, a new second curve with the book, it's you doing what you feel you need to be doing, the expression of you in all of this. Do you think, and as I referenced a couple of minutes ago, you put in the hard yards, you went about it, you applied discipline, and so many of those skills and experiences on the journey of life you brought to each stage of the journey, right? And that's really key for all of us to remember. Even the terrible times, and even the, you know, the mistakes and the really silly stuff we do, or worse, it helps us grow and builds us and brings us ahead if we're open, right? But do you think, you know, your success is because ultimately you're doing what you are meant to be doing, and it's a reflection of you? Do you ever feel that?
I think it's completely about who I am. And it's funny because this was a big, big surprise to me, to my family. But then my sister was like, well, you're always doing something we don't expect. And so I think it is being you and being self accepting of the fact that you're not perfect. You're never going to be perfect. We all have flaws, we all have limits. And it's how you respond to those things. And for me, I think the secret is I respond to everything that happens to me in my life as a creative challenge, as an opportunity to be creative in coming up with a response or a solution that is outside of the box. And I think what you're saying, improv is a great metaphor because, you have to really, really good improv actors just don't go and start improvising. They train their bodies. They have to go through, a period of really taking on other people's emotions, experiencing it, sort of like the training you have to have as a therapist or a social worker. So again, I think people should take a moment and put down whatever roles or jobs that they've done and really try to pick out, well, what are the skills attached to this? So, okay, I'm a boring bookkeeper, but no, what do you do as a bookkeeper? And have a list, a huge long list, and look at it and say, well, what could I apply these to that relates to something that I really care about? And so, I call it like seam ripping. You take you take a garment apart, you look at all the pieces, you say which pieces do I want to turn into something new, which can stay behind, and then you create a whole new garment out of the old pieces and maybe add a few new embellishments. But that's the crux of it. It's never, oh, tomorrow I'm going to be a fashion influencer. It's always, tomorrow I'm going to do something creative and I'm going to bring all this stuff with me to do it. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to take some risks and I'm just going to put myself out and see what happens. The-
Well,
And
Lynn,
the worst thing that can happen is that you don't like it and you go back to the drawing board.
and you get on with the next thing, right? And I mean, those are such inspiring words. I have one last question for you. If you had a mantra, what would it be? Or what is it?
That's really hard. Um, have no regrets.
Beautiful. So, Lynn, it's been such an enormous pleasure seeing you today, hearing your story, hearing the anecdotes, getting your wisdom. And I'm super excited about the book and the next steps on the journey. Thank you so much for being with me. And I'm waiting for you in London. So you let me know.
Well, well, I have to tell you that my book's been sold to a UK
Of
publisher,
course it has, you rock star.
so I will be probably doing some book stuff in London. So I will see you.
I cannot wait. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Hi everyone, Dee here. I hope you enjoyed this incredible episode with my amazing guest. I hope you're enjoying the series. We'd love to hear from you, so do DM me and tell me all your stories of second curving. Lots of love.